In a quiet neighborhood, Sarah, a young black girl, spent most of her days as any other child might. She went to school, hung out with her friends, and tried her best to act like everything was normal. But Sarah's life was far from normal. At night, while other children went home to warm beds and loving families, Sarah walked the streets, searching for a place to sleep. Sarah's family had gone through hard times. Her mother worked long hours at 2 jobs, but the bills always piled up. They had to move out of their home when they couldn't pay rent anymore. Her father had left when she was very young, and Sarah was left to take care of herself as much as possible. Every evening after school, Sarah would walk past the playground near her old house. It was the one place she felt safe. It was a place where no one judged her, a place where she could rest without worrying about where to go next. She would sometimes sleep on one of the swings or under the slide, hugging her coat tightly to keep warm. But no one knew this. Sarah tried to keep her secret. She didn't want to burden anyone. She was afraid that if she told someone, they would send her to a group home or take her mother away. She remembered how her mom had told her once, "You need to stay strong, no matter what." Sarah took those words to heart, and so she kept her struggles hidden from the world. At school, Sarah was always smiling. She didn't want her classmates to know what was happening. She would laugh with her friends during lunch, talk about the latest movie, and do her homework like everything was perfect. But when the school bell rang, signaling the end of the day, she would feel a wave of sadness wash over her. She knew it was time to leave and head back to the empty playground, where she would sleep, alone in the cold. As Sarah walked through the park that evening, she thought about the life she wished she could have. She imagined a warm home where her mother was happy and where they didn't have to worry about the next meal. But in her heart, she knew that dream wasn't possible. Not now. Her mom was doing the best she could, but Sarah knew it was getting harder. Sarah tried to be understanding, but sometimes it was too much for a child to bear. What Sarah didn't know was that a man, Officer David Matthews, had been patrolling the area for weeks. Officer Matthews had been on the job for several years, and he had seen many different things in his neighborhood. But there was something about Sarah that caught his attention. Each day, Officer Matthews saw Sarah walking by the park after school, usually with a bag over her shoulder. He couldn't help but notice that she looked tired, as if she had been through something no child should experience. He saw her sitting on the swings, staring off into the distance, and something inside him told him that she wasn't just playing. There was something wrong, something that wasn't being said. One evening, as Sarah sat on the swing, Officer Matthews parked his patrol car nearby. He watched her for a while, unsure of what to do. He had seen a lot of troubled kids in the area, but Sarah seemed different. He decided to approach her, hoping to learn more. "Hey there, you all right?" Officer Matthews asked gently, stepping closer to the swings. Sarah looked up, startled. She hadn't expected anyone to talk to her. She forced a smile, but her eyes were tired. "I'm fine," she replied quickly, standing up from the swing. Just tired." Officer Matthews could tell that there was more to the story. He had heard the rumors about kids in the neighborhood, and he had seen his fair share of hardship, but there was something about Sarah that made him want to help. "Are you sure you're okay?" he asked, kneeling down to her level. Sarah hesitated for a moment. She knew she should lie and say everything was fine. But something about Officer Matthews made her feel like maybe, just maybe, she could trust him. She took a deep breath and quietly said, "I don't have anywhere else to go." It was those words, spoken so softly and with such sadness, that changed everything for Officer Matthews. He had seen people struggle before, but hearing a child speak so openly about their pain hit him hard. He didn't know what to say, but he knew he couldn't just walk away. "Do you have anyone you can talk to? Your mom, maybe?" he asked gently, trying to comfort her. Sarah looked down at her feet. "My mom's working late," she replied quietly. I don't want to bother her with more problems." Officer Matthews knew he had to do something. He couldn't leave this girl alone. He gently placed a hand on her shoulder and said, You're not bothering anyone. We'll figure this out together." And that was the beginning of a new chapter for Sarah. Little did she know, Officer Matthews' actions that evening would lead to a new beginning, a way out of the darkness she had been facing all alone. After Officer Matthews spoke with Sarah, he could see the vulnerability in her eyes. She was a child, and she needed help. He wasn't sure what exactly he could do, but he knew he couldn't leave her there, alone and without a safe place to go. "Why don't you come with me for a little bit?" Officer Matthews suggested gently. "I'll take you somewhere safe, and we can figure things out." Sarah looked at him, unsure. She had always been taught to be cautious around strangers, especially people in uniforms. But there was something about Officer Matthews that made her feel like he wasn't a threat. He wasn't like the other people she had encountered in her life. There was kindness in his eyes. I don't know," Sarah whispered, still unsure. "I don't want to cause more trouble." "You're not causing any trouble," Officer Matthews reassured her. "I just want to make sure you're safe." Sarah hesitated for a moment, thinking about her mom, who was always working late and struggling to make ends meet. She wanted to be strong, like her mom always said, but tonight she just couldn't do it alone. After a moment of silence, she nodded. "Okay," she said softly. "I'll go with you." The two of them walked to Officer Matthews' patrol car. He made sure Sarah was comfortable in the front seat and began driving through the neighborhood, thinking about where to take her. He knew he needed to contact Child Services to make sure Sarah had the proper care, but he didn't want to overwhelm her right away. He wanted her to feel safe first. As they drove, Sarah sat quietly, looking out the window. She had never been in a police car before, and she felt a strange mix of fear and relief. She had been through so much already, and this was a new experience for her, one that was both terrifying and comforting at the same time. Officer Matthews looked over at her, seeing how young and innocent she was. It broke his heart to think about a child living without the love and care she deserved. He had children of his own, and could never imagine one of them being alone, without a home to call their own. "Sarah," Officer Matthews said gently, "I just want to make sure you're okay. I know this must be hard, but you're not alone anymore." Sarah didn't say anything right away, but she could feel the warmth in his words. It was a small comfort in a world that had felt so cold for so long. The drive took them to a local shelter where Officer Matthews had worked with other children in the past. The building was clean and well-maintained, a safe place where children could find refuge. It wasn't a permanent solution, but it was a start. When they arrived, Officer Matthews spoke to the staff, explaining the situation and making sure they understood Sarah's needs. He promised that he would check on her the next day to make sure she was okay. "Thank you," Sarah said quietly to Officer Matthews as he got ready to leave. Her voice trembled, but there was a sense of relief behind the words. "Thank you for helping me." Officer Matthews smiled at her. "You don't have to thank me. You deserve to be safe and happy, Sarah. I'll be checking on you, okay?" Sarah nodded, a small smile forming on her face for the first time in days. She felt a glimmer of hope, something she hadn't felt in a long time. As Officer Matthews drove away, he couldn't shake the feeling that Sarah's story was just beginning. He had made a small difference in her life, but he knew there was much more to do. The next day, he planned to meet with her mom and ensure that they had the support they needed to get back on their feet. But for now, Sarah was safe. She was in a place where she wouldn't have to sleep on a playground again, at least not for tonight. And for the first time in a long time, she allowed herself to close her eyes and rest, knowing she wasn't alone. The road ahead would still be challenging, but with the kindness and help of Officer Matthews, Sarah had taken the first step toward a better life. Little did she know, that night would be the turning point, the moment everything started to change for the better. The next morning, Officer Matthews woke up feeling a little more hopeful than he had in weeks. He had helped Sarah, a young girl who had been living on the streets, find a safe place to stay, but he knew the real work was just beginning. He couldn't forget the sadness in her eyes or the way she had hesitated to trust him. Today, Officer Matthews was going to meet with Sarah's mother. He had made arrangements for them to meet at the shelter where Sarah had spent the night, hoping to find a way to support the family and make sure that Sarah had a better future. As he drove to the shelter, his mind raced with questions. How had Sarah ended up in such a difficult situation? What had her life been like before this? He knew the answers wouldn't come easily, but he was determined to help her in any way he could. When he arrived at the shelter, he was greeted by Sarah, who had already woken up and was sitting in the common area. She looked more at ease than she had the night before, and Officer Matthews couldn't help but feel a small sense of relief. He walked over to her, and she gave him a shy smile. "Good morning, Sarah," he said, sitting down next to her. "How are you feeling today?" "I'm okay," she replied softly. "I slept a little better." Officer Matthews nodded. "I'm glad to hear that. I'm going to meet your mom today, and we'll talk about what we can do to help you both. Does that sound all right?" Sarah nodded, though she still seemed uncertain. "Yeah, I guess." Just then, the door to the shelter opened, and Sarah's mom stepped inside. Officer Matthews stood up to greet her. The woman looked tired, with dark circles under her eyes, but there was a strength in her expression that caught his attention. "Hello," he said kindly, extending his hand. "I'm Officer Matthews. Thank you for meeting with me today." Sarah's mom shook his hand, her grip firm but hesitant. "I'm Sarah's mother," she said. "Thank you for looking after her." Officer Matthews smiled. "Of course. Sarah's a brave girl. She's safe here, and we're going to work together to figure out what happens next." The three of them sat down at a table in the shelter's community room. Officer Matthews explained the situation and reassured Sarah's mom that the shelter was a temporary solution and that they would work with other organizations to provide long-term support. He asked her about their living situation, trying to understand what had led Sarah to sleep in a playground. As Sarah's mom shared her story, Officer Matthews listened carefully. She had been struggling for months, trying to find steady work while caring for Sarah and her younger brother. They had bounced between friends' houses and temporary shelters, but nothing seemed to stick. Her job at the diner barely paid enough to cover the bills, and she often had to choose between buying food and paying for rent. The pressure had been overwhelming, and she hadn't known where to turn. "I'm sorry," Sarah's mom said, wiping her eyes. "I didn't want Sarah to feel like this was normal. I didn't want her to be out there on the streets, but sometimes it just feels like nothing goes right." Officer Matthews put a reassuring hand on her shoulder. "You're doing the best you can, and that's all anyone can ask for. We're going to help you get back on your feet. It's not going to happen overnight, but we'll take it one step at a time." Sarah's mom nodded, the tears starting to fall. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't know what we would have done without you." Officer Matthews felt a deep sense of pride, knowing he had made a difference in their lives. He knew there was still a long road ahead, but he also knew that by working together, they could start to build a better future for Sarah and her family. As he left the shelter later that day, he couldn't help but feel hopeful. The road ahead wouldn't be easy, but for the first time in a long while, things were starting to look brighter. Sarah's future was no longer uncertain, and with the help of Officer Matthews and others in the community, she would have the chance to thrive. The kindness shown to her, even in the darkest moments, had opened the door to a new beginning. A beginning filled with hope, support, and the promise of a better tomorrow. The following week, things began to look a little brighter for Sarah and her family. With Officer Matthews' help, they were able to secure a place to live in a nearby apartment complex. It wasn't much, but it was safe and warm, something Sarah hadn't experienced in months. The feeling of security gave Sarah and her mother hope that things could get better. As Sarah settled into her new home, she still found it difficult to adjust. The past months of uncertainty had left their mark on her, and she struggled to shake off the fear that came with living on the streets. Every creak of the floor, every noise outside the window made her feel nervous, as if she was still waiting for something to go wrong. But each day that passed in the new apartment, Sarah felt a little more at ease. Her mother, too, seemed to be breathing easier. She had a steady job now, working full-time at a local bakery, and she had even started looking into other opportunities. The pressure wasn't gone, but there was a sense of stability in their lives that hadn't been there before. Every evening, Sarah's mom would sit down with her to help with homework, something they hadn't been able to do in so long. It was a simple act, but to Sarah, it meant the world. Meanwhile, Officer Matthews continued to check in on them, making sure they were settling in okay, and that they had everything they needed. He had become something of a mentor to Sarah, someone she could talk to when she felt scared or uncertain. It wasn't always easy for Sarah to open up, but Officer Matthews was patient, letting her take the time she needed. He understood that trust had to be earned, and he wasn't about to push her. One afternoon, Officer Matthews knocked on their door. Sarah's mom answered with a warm smile, inviting him in. "Hey there, how's everything going?" he asked, taking a seat at the kitchen table. "We're doing okay," Sarah's mom replied, her voice full of relief. "It's not perfect, but it's a start. Sarah's doing much better." Sarah, who had been in her room reading a book, came out and shyly approached the table. Officer Matthews smiled at her. "How's the reading going?" he asked, hoping to lighten the mood. Sarah smiled back. "I'm almost done with the book," she said, her voice a little more confident than it had been a week ago. "It's about a girl who makes friends with a dog. I like it." "That's great," Officer Matthews said. "Reading is important. Keep it up." As they chatted, Sarah's mother began to explain how she had been looking into some adult education programs to improve her skills and increase her chances of finding a better job. Officer Matthews nodded, pleased to hear her plans. He encouraged her to keep moving forward, reminding her that sometimes progress came in small steps. Even though it felt slow, every little change made a difference. The next few weeks brought new challenges. Sarah's mom struggled with balancing work, education, and caring for Sarah, but she kept going, driven by the desire to give her children a better life. It wasn't easy, but she was determined to make things work. Sarah, too, was adjusting, though slowly. She began to open up more, spending time with new friends at school and talking about her day at dinner. She still had moments when she felt overwhelmed by the changes, but she was starting to see that the future didn't have to be full of fear. One day, Sarah came home from school with a big smile on her face. She ran into the living room, holding something in her hand. "Guess what?" she said, excited. "I made the soccer team." Her mom looked up in surprise, and Officer Matthews, who had just arrived to check on them, smiled. "That's fantastic," he said, high-fiving Sarah. "I never thought I could do something like that," Sarah admitted. "But I tried, and I made it." "That's the spirit," Officer Matthews said. "You can do anything when you believe in yourself." That moment marked a turning point for Sarah. For the first time in a long while, she felt proud of herself. She realized that she was capable of achieving things, that she didn't have to be defined by her past struggles. It was a small victory, but it was a victory that filled her with hope for the future. In the weeks that followed, things only got better. Sarah's confidence grew as she became more involved in school and her community. Her mother continued to work hard, always putting her children's well-being first, and Officer Matthews remained a steady presence in their lives, providing guidance and encouragement when they needed it. Though their journey was far from over, Sarah and her family had come a long way since that night on the playground. They were no longer defined by their struggles. Instead, they were defined by their strength, resilience, and the love they shared. And in that moment, Sarah realized something important. The future was in her hands, and she was ready to take it on. As the weeks went by, Sarah and her family's life began to feel more settled. The apartment was small, but it was theirs, and that alone made it feel like home. Every day after school, Sarah would head to the local park where she'd meet her friends. It wasn't far from her new home, and it became a place of joy, where she could forget about the worries that had once weighed her down. Sarah's mother, determined to make a better life for her family, continued to attend the adult education classes and work at the bakery. She was becoming more confident in herself, despite the hardships she had faced in the past. Some days were still tough, but she never gave up. She knew that if she worked hard enough, she could build a brighter future for Sarah and her siblings. At school, Sarah had begun to shine. Her teachers noticed her improvement not only in her studies but also in her confidence. She had gone from being a shy and reserved student to a girl who eagerly participated in class and made new friends. Her teammates on the soccer team noticed it too. Sarah's speed and enthusiasm on the field made her a star, and soon she was the one cheering her teammates on. One afternoon, Sarah came home from school with an invitation in hand. "Mom, Mom," she called as she burst through the door. "I got invited to a birthday party. It's this Saturday." Her mother smiled, proud of her. "That's wonderful, sweetie. Are you excited?" "I am. I've never been to a birthday party before," Sarah replied, her voice filled with excitement. Sarah's mother felt a warmth in her heart. It wasn't just about the party. It was about seeing her daughter become a part of something bigger than herself, something she had missed out on in the past. Sarah was starting to feel like she truly belonged. The next Saturday, Sarah attended the party, and it was everything she had hoped for. The games, the laughter, and the cake, everything was perfect. Sarah felt like she was finally living the childhood she had always dreamed of. She ran around with her friends, joining in all the fun, and for a few hours, the worries of the world faded away. Meanwhile, Officer Matthews continued to visit the family, checking in on them to make sure everything was going well. He could see the changes in Sarah and her mother, and it made him proud to know he had been part of their journey. He often told Sarah how proud he was of her, especially after seeing how far she had come. She wasn't the same girl who had been sleeping in the park weeks earlier. Now she was a confident, kind-hearted young girl with so much potential ahead of her. One day, while Sarah and her mother were walking home from the store, they ran into Officer Matthews again. "How's everything going?" he asked, smiling. "We're doing really well," Sarah's mother replied. "I've been able to get more hours at work, and Sarah's making so many new friends." Sarah beamed, her eyes shining with pride. "I even scored the winning goal at practice today," she said excitedly. "I feel like I'm finally starting to catch up to the other kids." Officer Matthews smiled warmly at her. "I'm not surprised at all. You've always had the strength in you." Sarah's mother looked at him gratefully. "I don't know what we would have done without your help." "Just doing my job," Officer Matthews said humbly. "But I'm glad I could make a difference. You're both doing great." The simple words meant the world to Sarah and her mother. Officer Matthews wasn't just a police officer. He had become a friend, someone who believed in them when they needed it most. As time passed, Sarah continued to grow in confidence. She found joy in learning, in soccer, and in the friendships she had made. Her mother's hard work was paying off as well. They both understood that things wouldn't always be easy, but now they faced the challenges of life with a renewed sense of hope. They had gone from living in a playground to building a future. The world no longer felt like an impossible place. Instead, it felt full of possibilities. Sarah knew that there would be tough days ahead, but she also knew that with determination, kindness, and the support of those who cared about her, she could overcome anything. One evening, as Sarah lay in bed thinking about how far they had come, she smiled to herself. She had a home, she had friends, and most importantly, she had a mother who loved her. She was no longer just a girl with a difficult past. She was someone with a bright future, a future she would create for herself, one step at a time. And with that thought, she closed her eyes, ready to face whatever came next. Life continued to improve for Sarah and her family, but not without facing new challenges. As Sarah entered the 6th grade, she felt more confident than ever before. Her grades improved, she made even more friends, and she was getting used to her new life. However, new challenges were always waiting just around the corner. One day, Sarah received an invitation to join a special school event. a field trip to the Science Museum. It was a big deal for her, and she couldn't wait to go. There was just one problem. Her mother didn't have enough money to cover the cost of the trip. Sarah's mother had always been honest with her about their financial struggles, but Sarah hated seeing her mom worry. It was hard for Sarah to accept that she couldn't go to the trip because of money. After school that day, Sarah decided to speak to her teacher, Mrs. Carter. "Mrs. Carter, I really want to go on the field trip, but my mom can't afford the ticket. I don't know what to do," she said, her voice full of concern. Mrs. Carter smiled gently. "Sarah, I'm so proud of you for coming to me. We want all the students to be able to go, so we'll find a way. Don't worry, I'll speak with the school principal." That afternoon, Mrs. Carter spoke with Principal Davis, explaining Sarah's situation. The principal, a kind-hearted man, was moved by the story. He had watched Sarah grow over the past few months and was impressed by her resilience and hard work. "I think Sarah deserves to go. Let's make sure she can attend the field trip," he said. A few days later, Sarah received a note from Mrs. Carter, telling her that the school had arranged for her to go to the Science Museum without needing to pay. The principal had personally taken care of the cost. When Sarah read the note, tears filled her eyes. For the first time in a long while, she felt like things were truly starting to change. When she told her mother about the field trip and how the school had helped, her mom smiled proudly. "You deserve it, Sarah. You've worked so hard, and it's paying off. I'm so proud of you," she said. The day of the field trip finally arrived, and Sarah was thrilled. She joined her classmates and boarded the bus, excited to see the exhibits at the museum. It was a day full of learning, fun, and new experiences. For Sarah, it felt like a dream come true. The museum was full of incredible science experiments, displays, and interactive exhibits that made her feel as though she could one day be part of that world. The trip reminded Sarah that even though life had its struggles, there were still opportunities to dream and grow. As the field trip came to an end, Sarah noticed a group of students talking and laughing in front of an exhibit. She hadn't noticed before, but one of them was holding a gift bag. "I want to show you something," the student said, opening the bag to reveal a small science kit. "I got this from the museum's gift shop. My parents bought it for me." Sarah had never been able to afford extras like that before. As she walked back to the bus, she couldn't help but feel a little sad. She wished she could have a little something to remember the day by, too. However, she realized that the experiences and the friendships she had made during the trip were more valuable than any toy or gift. On the bus ride back to school, she smiled to herself. She had learned so much, but more importantly, she had seen how kindness from others could make a difference. Sarah was reminded once again that the people around her were not just part of her journey. They were the ones helping her create her future. A few days later, the principal sent Sarah a message. "I hope you enjoyed the trip, Sarah. I wanted to remind you that we're here to help you. If you ever need anything, don't hesitate to ask." Sarah's heart swelled with gratitude. She had learned that help comes from unexpected places, and that sometimes all it takes is asking. She was no longer just the girl who lived in a playground, struggling to survive. She was someone who had learned the value of kindness, generosity, and the support of others. As Sarah walked home from school that day, her thoughts wandered. She realized that the dreams she had as a little girl were still alive, but now she had the tools to make them a reality. She could see a future full of possibilities, and she knew that, with hard work, support, and determination, anything was possible. With her mother by her side, and the kindness of others lifting her up, Sarah was ready to take on the next chapter of her life. The weeks after the field trip passed quickly, and Sarah's life began to feel different. She felt more confident in herself and her abilities. Her schoolwork was improving, and she had even started to participate more in class discussions. It wasn't just the field trip that had changed her, it was the way people had helped her, showing her kindness and offering support when she needed it the most. It made her realize that sometimes a little bit of help could change everything. One afternoon, As Sarah sat at the kitchen table, her mother walked in with a big smile on her face. She had been on the phone for a while, talking to someone Sarah had never heard of before. "Sarah, I have some exciting news for you," her mother said, sitting down beside her. Sarah's heart raced. "What's the news?" she asked, eager to hear. "Well, remember when I told you that things were going to get better? Well, I got a job offer. It's a really good opportunity, and it could help us get back on our feet." Sarah's eyes widened. This was the moment she had been waiting for, the moment that would help change everything for her and her family. "That's amazing, Mom. What kind of job is it?" Her mother smiled. "It's a full-time position at a local community center. I'll be helping organize events, tutoring kids, and getting more involved in the community. It's everything I've been looking for." Tears of happiness welled up in Sarah's eyes as she hugged her mother tightly. She knew this job would make a huge difference in their lives, and it made her feel even more determined to keep going, no matter how hard things might seem. Over the next few months, Sarah's life became a whirlwind of new experiences. She helped her mom prepare for the community center's events, volunteering and learning new skills along the way. Her mother's new job also helped them financially, allowing them to move into a better apartment. It was a fresh start, a new chapter for both of them. At school, Sarah's teachers noticed her growing confidence. She had always been a quiet student, but now she raised her hand to answer questions and participated in group activities. She was no longer the shy girl who kept to herself. Instead, she was the girl who spoke up, who believed in her own voice. One day, Sarah's class was assigned to write a story about their hopes and dreams. Sarah had never thought much about what her future might look like, but as she sat at her desk, she found herself writing about her aspirations. "When I grow up, I want to be a scientist. I want to discover new things and help people in ways that make their lives better. I want to help other kids like me, who may not have the same opportunities but have the same potential. I will work hard, and I will make a difference. I believe that no matter where we start, we can always rise higher if we keep trying." As Sarah finished writing, she felt a sense of pride. She wasn't just dreaming anymore. She was working towards her goals every day. She knew that with her mother's support, the kindness of the people around her, and her own determination, she could achieve anything. The next day, Sarah handed her story to Mrs. Carter, her teacher, who read it with a smile. "This is a beautiful story, Sarah," she said. "You've got a bright future ahead of you. Keep believing in yourself." After school, Sarah and her mother sat together, reading a letter they had just received. It was an invitation to a summer science camp, and it offered a scholarship to cover the cost. Sarah's heart soared. The camp was exactly what she had hoped for, a chance to learn, grow, and pursue her dreams. Her mother hugged her tightly. "This is just the beginning, Sarah. You're going places, and I'm so proud of you." As Sarah prepared for the summer camp, she realized how much her life had changed in such a short time. It was as if all the struggles, all the hardships, had led her to this point, a moment when she could look ahead and see a future full of possibilities. The journey wasn't over. It would still take hard work, sacrifice, and perseverance. But Sarah knew that she was no longer alone. She had her mother, her teachers, and the entire community cheering her on. She had learned that no matter how tough life got, there was always hope, and there was always a way to rise above it. With newfound determination, Sarah faced the future with courage, ready to take on the world. The playground that had once been her home was now just a distant memory, replaced by a future filled with opportunities, dreams, and the promise of a better tomorrow.